Penguin Random House Audio presents The Book of Polly by Kathy Hepinstall. Read for you by Jenna Lamia. I'm not sure at what young age I became frozen with the knowledge, certainty, and horror that my mother would die one day. Spared the passing of my father, the captain, by my status as a fetus, I was cowering in the womb when my mother found my father dead in his chair. Polly told me the story when I was old enough to hear it. She was smoking a cigarette, a habit I feared and detested. One of my earliest memories was reaching up and trying to snatch a cigarette from her lips. Even then, I knew my enemy. But she was too fast for me, and by the time I heard the story of my father's death, I'd mostly given up trying, so I just sat watching the trail of smoke. The captain was once a Navy man. You know that. Anyway, he got this wooden lobster from the Philippines when he met Ferdinand Marcos. Another story. But when he died, the lobster was sitting there in his lap. I guess he'd taken it down from the wall to admire it just before the stroke got him. And that's what happens when you die. It's no more complicated than that, if you're lucky. She took a long puff, and the smoke spiraled toward the ceiling, her eyes bright. My mother never cried, at least not in front of me. Instead, her green eyes got greener, more sparkly, as though the tears were fuel for that color and nothing else. She had conceived me in something close to a bona fide miracle, when she and her soon-to-be-late husband of 37 years consummated their love for the last time. From the absurdity of that union came the news that my mother received from her doctor 3 days after my father's funeral. Polly, in her late 50s, was due to have one more child in the year 1992. Willow. Me. The doctor advised her to terminate the pregnancy. She advised the doctor to drop dead and mind his own business. 8 months later, I was born. My family already gone like a train pulled out of a station. My father dead, my brother and sister grown and gone. Polly was old and tired and cranky, and yet she had to start over. A new generation of parents had moved into the neighborhood, remodeling the houses around her as hers fell apart. Old enough to be my grandmother, she brought me up with the same methods she'd used with her other children, folksy Southern wisdom and distinctly custom-made punishments. Which explained why, on this brisk April morning, we were barreling toward my school in a two-tone Impala, Polly driving, me riding shotgun, and a falcon in a cage in the back seat. Polly had found the falcon through an old fishing buddy of hers, and had managed to procure its rental for free. "Please," I begged Polly one last time. "I'm sorry. Don't go to school with that falcon." I was 10 at the time, and Polly 68. We were at a light. The brakes squealed a bit, and she glared at me. She had on her Homeowners Association power suit, a pale pearl-colored dress with round buttons, a small silk handkerchief in the breast pocket, and medium-heel shoes. She'd rubbed them down with a cheesecloth earlier that morning to take out the scuff marks. She was a small, slim woman, petite, with a delicate face, and remarkably smooth skin for a woman her age. The result, perhaps, of the homemade mixture of rosewater and black currant seed oil she faithfully slathered on at night. She wore no makeup except for a burgundy lipstick, in the shade of a knowing glare. She had worn the same hairstyle for decades, a soft bowl around her head, and had kept her hair, more or less, the same shade of light brown, although she had dyed her hair the night before. Either through agitation or distraction, she had left it with a certain orangey tone that she had noted with exasperation, but did not have time to address. Orangey hair and red lipstick. They did not go together. like two flowers that clash in a bouquet. The configuration was wrong, and I was somehow to blame for it, too. "Did you hear me?" I asked. "I'm sorry." But she was unmoved. "No one calls my daughter a liar," she said, leaning on the word in a way that made me miserable, because I was, in fact, a liar, and I had told some lies, and even worse, some truths, about my mother to my classmates. In my defense, she was great fodder, and this was years before she killed our neighbor. I sighed, giving up. Once she had determined a punishment, she never deviated, so it was hopeless to ask. I turned around and looked at the falcon. Polly's friend had shown her how to take it out of the cage and wear the leather protector on her shoulder. The falcon had white feathers with brown spots, a yellow, world-weary head, and a dangerously curved beak. It stared back at me. The falcon, no doubt, was equally unamused by the situation. "Just tell me," Polly said, "that saying I hunted with a falcon was the biggest lie you told." It was not. My elementary school had not been updated for decades, and still bore that 70s school decor. We arrived right before school started, so the halls were crowded as Polly moved down the hallway with a purposeful stride, the falcon balanced on her right shoulder, perched on its leather protector, its right foot secured by a leather strap. I followed her, wilting, horrified, as I'm sure she had expected. It was one thing to speak of her in fond abstractions, to tell both the tall tales and the truthful ones, and let my listeners sort them out. But here she was in the flesh, and kids stopped to gape as she passed by. No insults or smart remarks or giggles of laughter, just open wonder at the sight. The falcon sat calmly on her shoulder, staring at the students as though sizing them up as prey, its eyes flat and dark. Ashamed as I was at being part of such a spectacle, I could not help a creeping pride in my mother's regal manner, the way she glided along in that dress, with buttons carefully repurposed from another dress, and sleeves she had pressed that morning with the tip of an iron. She did not speak to me. I quickened my steps to catch up with her, and then entered the sphere of her fragrance, lilacs, with an undercurrent of honeysuckle, the only gentle and forgiving part of her outfit, for it was the perfume she wore to church to be sniffed by her Methodist God. My mother had made no bones about the fact that she had already raised 2 children in this school, both of whom had their own share of disciplinary problems. Shell, with his penchant for pocket-knife flipping, and Lisa, with her proselytizing. And Polly's only wish was to lie low while the last laggard child grew up without trouble. And here I was, in trouble. Our school counselor, Ms. Jourdain, used to be Coach Jourdain back in my first-grade gym class. I remembered her as somewhat boyish and happy, her cheeks puffing out to release the shriek of a whistle lustily during dodgeball, her arms bare and thick with dark blonde fuzz, and a single hair growing out of her cheek. Ms. Jourdain had taken night classes, gotten a master's degree in psychology, and hoisted herself into administration, but even her name on the door seemed to evoke the hot, cat-tongue smell of that gymnasium. Ms. Jourdain sat behind her desk, going through some papers when we entered her office. I hadn't seen much of her over the years, and up close, her appearance startled me. They'd tamed her, plucked the hair from her face, smoothed her arms, taken her out of gym clothes, and dressed her like a businesswoman. She sensed our presence and looked up, her face unguarded for a brief instant, as she took in the sight of Polly, with the falcon on her shoulder. "Who's calling my daughter a liar?" Polly demanded by way of greeting. She shook off her look of surprise, stood, and
Sample complete. Ready to continue?